By early 1945, the German front lines were disintegrating. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army's Vistula-Oder offensive had brought Soviet forces within 60 kilometers of Berlin. In the west, the Allies had crossed the Rhine. Despite the tightening noose, the Nazi leadership maintained a facade of defiance. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels spoke of total war, while Hitler retreated into the Führerbunker, a reinforced concrete complex 5 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere was a mix of claustrophobia and clinical delusion. Adolf Hitler, now 56 but appearing decades older due to deteriorating health and tremors, remained the center of a shrinking universe. He spent his days in military briefings, moving non-existent armies across maps. When his generals reported that certain divisions had been annihilated or could not move due to lack of fuel, they were met with accusations of cowardice and high treason. On March 19, 1945, Hitler issued the Nero Decree. He ordered the destruction of all German infrastructure, factories, bridges, and communication lines, to prevent them from falling into Allied hands. He famously stated that if the German people could not win the war, they did not deserve to survive. This scorched earth policy was largely undermined by Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, who realized that such actions would guarantee the starvation of the German population after the war. On April 16th, the final Soviet assault on Berlin began with the Battle of the Seelow Heights. Within days, the city was completely encircled. The defense of the capital was left to a disorganized force of depleted Wehrmacht units, the SS, and the Volkssturm, a militia consisting of elderly men and children as young as 12. As the Red Army moved street by street toward the city center, the citadel area around the Chancellery became a wasteland of fire and rubble. The final blow to Hitler's morale was not military, but personal. On April 23rd, Hermann Göring sent a telegram from Berchtesgaden, asking to take over leadership of the Reich. Hitler declared him a traitor. Days later, news arrived that Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and the man Hitler called Der True Heinrich, the loyal Heinrich, had attempted to negotiate a surrender with the Western Allies. The realization that his most loyal henchmen were abandoning him shattered Hitler's remaining resolve. On April 30th, as Soviet troops were only a few hundred meters from the bunker, Hitler bid farewell to his staff. Shortly after 3:30 p.m., Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Following Hitler's explicit instructions to avoid the public desecration suffered by Benito Mussolini, their bodies were carried to the garden above, doused in gasoline, and burned during a Soviet artillery barrage. On May 2nd, the garrison of Berlin surrendered to the Soviet Union. On May 7th, Germany signed an unconditional surrender at Reims. France repeated the following day in Berlin. The war in Europe was over. The Third Reich, which Hitler had claimed would endure for 1,000 years, had lasted just over 12, leaving behind a continent in ruins and a legacy of unprecedented industrial-scale genocide. Following Hitler's death, the remnants of the Nazi leadership scrambled to consolidate what little power remained. Per Hitler's final testament, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz was appointed president of the Reich, while Joseph Goebbels became chancellor. Goebbels, however, remained in the bunker only long enough to attempt a failed negotiation with the Soviets. On May 1st, realizing the futility of his position, Goebbels and his wife Magda poisoned their 6 children before taking their own lives. Following Hitler's death, the remnants of the Nazi leadership scrambled to consolidate what little power remained. Per Hitler's final testament, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz was appointed president of the Reich, while Joseph Goebbels became chancellor. Goebbels, however, remained in the bunker only long enough to attempt a failed negotiation with the Soviets. On May 1st, realizing the futility of his position, Goebbels and his wife Magda poisoned their 6 children before taking their own lives. Donitz established a temporary administration known as the Flensburg government near the Danish border. His primary objective was not to win the war, an impossibility, but to stall the Soviet advance as long as possible. By doing so, He hoped to allow millions of German soldiers and refugees to flee westward and surrender to the Americans and British instead of the Red Army. The inevitable end arrived in early May. On May 7, 1945, at a small red brick schoolhouse in Reims, France, General Alfred Jodl signed the unconditional surrender of all German forces. The Soviet leadership, however, insisted on a separate ceremony in Berlin to symbolize their primary role in the victory. On the night of May 8th, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signed a second document of surrender in the presence of Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov. This marked the official end of hostilities in Europe, celebrated globally as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. The collapse of the regime left Germany a Trümmerlandschaft, landscape of ruins. The nation was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, situated deep within the Soviet zone, was also split into 4 sectors. Millions were dead, and millions more were displaced. Displaced persons, DPs, including Holocaust survivors, forced laborers, and released POWs, wandered a continent with destroyed railways and non-existent supply lines. The physical destruction of Germany's cities was so complete that many believed it would take a century to rebuild. The fall of the Reich was followed by a quest for justice. In November 1945, the International Military Tribunal began in Nuremberg, the former site of the Nazi Party rallies. The downfall of Hitler was more than a military defeat. It was the total collapse of a totalitarian ideology. The vacuum left by the Reich's disappearance set the stage for the Cold War, as the uneasy alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union dissolved into decades of geopolitical tension. The ruins of the Führerbunker were eventually demolished and filled in by the East German government to prevent the site from becoming a shrine for neo-Nazis. Today, an unassuming information board stands over what was once the nerve center of the Reich, serving as a silent reminder of how a regime built on hatred, expansionism, and the cult of personality resulted in the total annihilation of its own creators and the devastation of a continent.